Let us begin, softly, with silence. A stillness older than time, warmer than breath. Close your eyes now, dear dreamer, and listen not with your ears, but with the space between your thoughts. Let the room around you grow quiet and distant as the sands of memory rise beneath your feet. Tonight, we journey far into the shadowed hush of ancient Egypt, not into its golden pharaohs, nor the bright temples of Ra, but into the red twilight of the forgotten god, Set. He is the one whispered of in desert winds, spoken of in dual tones, half curse, half praise. He is chaos, they say, but he is also the knife that opens, the storm that clears, the darkness that defines the light. In this tale, we do not run from Set. We walk beside him, slowly, across red sands that whisper beneath our steps, beneath stars that do not judge. And we listen, not to what is said of him, but what is buried in silence beneath the myths. The ancients lived not by good and evil, but by Ma'at and Isfet, order and unorder. Their world was not a place of saints and sinners, but of balance, tension, and the eternal breath of opposites. Set was never an accident. He was necessary. And so, we will begin. Long before his name, long before gods were known, we will return to the quiet void that was not empty, but waiting. As you lie there, wrapped in stillness, let your breath slow. Let the myth open gently around you, like linen unraveling in moonlight. Let the sands cover the noise of day, grain by grain. Let the dream begin. Before all names, before time had steps, there was stillness, a great, endless stillness. The ancient Egyptians called it none, not a god, not a place, but a boundless, formless sea of chaos. Imagine it now, endless dark water without wave or edge, yet not frightening, only deep, silent, waiting. None was not lonely. It was whole. It did not move, yet within it, everything slept, not yet born, not yet dreaming. This was the beginning, or more truthfully, the before beginning. There was no sky, no earth, no stars or flame, only potential, suspended like dew that has not yet fallen. And in that sacred hush, something stirred, not with sound, but with will. The Egyptians did not think of creation as a command, but as a rising. From the heart of the waters rose a mound, a single, stable point, like the first breath after stillness. They called this the Benben. It was the first land, a small, golden hill rising from black waters. Some say it shone like a pyramid's point. Others say it pulsed like an egg, warm and alive. Upon this mound, in silence, came the first light. Not the sun as we know it, but consciousness, awareness. From within, none emerged a god, Atum, or sometimes Ra-Atum. He was the first voice, the first fire, but even he was born of the darkness. He came from Nun, from unshaped chaos. And he knew this. He remembered. Atum created by spilling himself into the world. Through tears, through breath, through secret names. He brought forth his children, Shu, the air, and Tefnut, the moisture. They in turn gave birth to Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. Nut arched over the world like a deep indigo goddess strewn with stars. Geb lay beneath her, green and brown and still. Between them stretched Shu, the invisible force of air, holding sky and earth apart so life could stir. And thus the world began, land beneath, sky above, breath between. From this divine family came gods and goddesses, and among them, much later, would rise Set. But not yet. Now, the world was young, balanced. Every force was born from another. Light from darkness, moisture from flame. Even chaos, even danger had its place in the early breath of the cosmos. For what is balance, if not tension held gently? The Nile had not yet flowed. The pyramids had not yet been imagined. But the blueprint of duality was there. In every god born of another, in every pair, male and female, light and dark, we find the sacred mirror. And slowly, through the deep breath of centuries, the gods began to take shape. Stories whispered themselves into being. Names grew roots. Myths sprouted like papyrus along the banks of time. In this hush, Set waited. Though not yet born, his place was already woven into the silence. For even in perfection, the Egyptians knew there must be tension. The red thread of chaos had to be part of the weave, or the cloth would tear too easily. So Set was written in the waters of Nun, not as mistake, but as reminder. Let us linger here a moment longer, where silence and meaning drink from the same spring, where the world has just remembered it exists, and gods walk like dreams across the curve of the earth. Let your thoughts drift across this gentle beginning. Everything is still forming, and so are you. The stillness of creation never lasted long. From the breath of that first god, Atum, or Ra-Atum, the world began its slow exhale. What was once unbroken silence began to hum, softly, with the voices of gods unfolding into existence like petals from sacred water. From Atum's heart came the first children, Shu, the air, and Tefnut, the moisture. He created them not in passion, but in thought, in whisper, in sacred sound. Some say he wept them into being. Others say he coughed them from his lungs or kissed them from the air. Creation was never cruel. It was intimate, mysterious, and wrapped in metaphor. Shu, the invisible space, filled the world like a breath held in stillness. Tefnut, glistening and soft, shimmered across the new world like dew that dreams of becoming river. They danced together through the young cosmos, forming the pulse between dryness and wetness, between whisper and wait. And through their union, they birthed Geb and Nut, earth and sky. In the beginning, Geb and Nut were lovers who would not part. She arched low, her star-speckled body pressing tenderly against him. They were inseparable. Sky and earth wrapped around each other, the horizon but a soft embrace. But the world needed space. The gods needed room to stir. And so Shu, their grandfather and father of breath, lifted Nut high above Geb, separating heaven and earth with the tender ache of sacrifice. And from their sorrowful parting, life unfolded. From Nut, the sky, came the divine children. Osiris, the green god of growth and judgment. Isis, the wise and loving queen. Nephthys, the shadowed sister. And Set. Ah, yes, Set. He was not born in rage. He was not forged in fire. He was born, as all things are, from a balance of opposites. If Osiris was the Nile's fertile flow, Set was the red desert that framed it. If Isis was healing and craft, Set was disruption and storm. He came into being not to oppose creation, but to preserve it by challenging its stagnation. The Egyptians knew too much peace, and the world dulls. Too much chaos, and it cracks. But a little of each, in measure. That was divine. Set's skin was said to be reddish, the color of desert sands. His form, not quite of any beast known. His head was long, with squared ears that stood upright, like some forgotten animal. His gaze, intense, sharp, eternal. He was not a being of softness, but of force. Not evil, not good, simply necessary. He ruled the desert and the foreign lands. He embodied storms, dry thunder, and the winds that howled beyond the settled Nile. While the other gods danced in gardens, Set stood alone on the horizon, eyes on the storms he welcomed. And even then, in those early days, the gods knew he was a protector. Set stood at the prow of Ra's sunboat, the vessel that crossed the sky by day and the underworld by night. Each evening, Ra entered the realm of shadow, the duat, where dangers stirred in the deep. And each night, the serpent of chaos, Apep, the great devourer, rose to swallow the sun. Set fought him every night, with spear, with roar, with divine fury, so the sun could rise again. In those earliest tales, Set was not cast from grace. He was exalted, worshipped. His force was the boundary between this world and the chaos beyond it. He did not destroy for pleasure, but for protection. But chaos is never loved as much as order, and balance, when misunderstood, is often condemned. Still, in those ancient days, before myths twisted and were told again in frightened tones, Set was part of the sacred whole. The gods lived in dynamic harmony. Osiris brought growth. Isis brought magic. Nephthys tended the veil between life and death. And Set kept the wild, wild. The people of Hemet, ancient Egypt, built temples not only for Ra and Osiris, but for Set. Especially in the desert towns, far from the Nile's forgiving arms. They revered him as Lord of the Red Land, keeper of storms, breaker of stagnation. To call upon Set was to invite challenge, and through it, strength. The divine family took shape. Their stories, rituals, and symbols passed through generations like scented smoke curling through temple halls. But always, Set stood a little apart, not because he was unwelcome, but because he belonged to the edge. From the sacred union and tension of gods, the world began to take form, not as an explosion, but as a blossoming, a slow unfurling, like papyrus leaves opening beneath the touch of the sun. The people of Kemet did not see the world as a place of random miracles. To them, the very bones of reality were sacred, and every tree, stone, or shadow whispered its role in the divine order. Their world was not built in haste. It was measured, ruled by a living balance they called Me'at, truth, order, harmony, and rightness. To live by Ma'at was not to obey a law, but to breathe in tune with the pulse of the universe. And so, from the gods came structure, sky above, earth below, river winding through, stars wheeling softly overhead. Time flowed like the Nile, cyclical, life-giving, never hurried. The Nile itself became a living artery of creation. Its annual flooding, so rhythmic and dependable, was seen as the breath of Osiris, his blessing rising from the underworld to nourish the land. The black soil it left behind was rich and fragrant, called Kemet, the Black Land. This was the realm of life, but just beyond its gentle banks stretched the Deshret, the Red Land. Here, the winds howled, the sun scorched, sand shifted and swallowed all who did not respect its silence. This was Set's realm. Yet, the Egyptians did not fear the desert as much as they understood it. They knew that for the Nile to be precious, it must be bordered, that for growth to have meaning, it must face challenge. And so, the Red Land was not hell. It was the mirror of paradise. Set was the guardian of that border, between life and death, order and wildness, known and unknown. He was not the destroyer of Ma'at. He was her test. Without him, order would decay into complacency. In these early ages, temples rose not only to Ra and Thoth, but also to Set, particularly in the borderlands, places where sand and shadow ruled. There, the priests offered incense, meat, and red ochre to the god of storms. They prayed not for calm, but for strength to endure the harshness. Set was not a god who sheltered. He was a god who sharpened. Magic, too, was born in these days, not as illusion, but as alignment with the divine will of the cosmos. They called it Heka, the sacred force that the gods used to shape the world, and which mortals, if worthy, could touch. Heka was spoken through words, etched in symbols, carried in amulets, and breathed through ritual. To practice magic was not to defy the gods, but to join in their weaving. Set's magic was not soft. It was made of wind and edge, of defiance and resilience. Where Isis used words of healing, Set used force to drive back the devourers. Where Osiris ruled the dead with judgment, Set protected the living with ferocity. Seasons were shaped by myth. The flooding of the Nile was Osiris's return. The heat of high summer, Set's time, when he rode the skies in Ra's boat, battling serpents in the Duat. And as stars moved, so too did stories. Time in Egypt was eternal recurrence, not a line, but a spiral, not loss, but return. The sky goddess Nut swallowed the sun each night and gave birth to it each dawn. The gods did not die as mortals do. They transformed. They returned. They echoed. And so did Set. He was not one thing, and never still. He was storm, sand, scream, and silence. To some, a villain. To others, the very reason the sun rose, and the people of Egypt. They walked between the black and red lands with reverence, understanding that life was only sacred because of the presence of the desert, the danger, the God who waited beyond the edge. That edge was where magic was strongest, where prayers became fierce, where humans became gods. And in those liminal spaces, in twilight, at horizon, beneath stars that never blinked, Set stood watch. The world was now formed, not perfect, not safe, not easy, but balanced. And balance, the Egyptians knew, was the true magic. Let your breath drift gently now, as though you walk the edge of river and sand, one foot in safety, one in challenge, both sacred. Who he was, how he came to be. He was born beneath a sky that never forgot. When Nut, the sky, gave birth to her divine children, she brought into the world 4 powerful beings, each a reflection of nature's deepest truths. Osiris, radiant and steady, the first king and symbol of life's harvest. Isis, luminous and wise, mistress of magic and healing. Nephthys, quiet as dusk, the hidden veil between worlds. And last came Set, born beneath an eclipse, they say, or beneath the scorching eye of the midday sun, when light turns harsh and shadows lengthen without relief. He came not as a curse, nor as a mistake. He came as contrast, as necessary depth, while his siblings represented growth, union, and mystery. Set embodied the unrelenting force that shapes all of it through resistance. From his earliest stories, he was not like the others. Osiris walked gently, loved greatly, and ruled with the calm hand of a river. Set, by contrast, was bold, unpredictable. His presence stirred things from comfort into change. Where Osiris planted, Set scattered. Where Isis bound, Set tore loose. He did not do this to undo the world, but to remind it that no order exists without something pressing against it. He was the storm behind the stillness, the challenge behind wisdom, the desert to the Nile. His dominion was the Deshret, the red desert that ringed the black land. While his brothers' temples rose near fields and cities, Set's shrines stood far out, where only wind, sand, and silence reigned. There, travelers would light fires to keep back the dark, whispering prayers to Set, not out of fear, but out of respect. They did not ask him for peace. They asked him for strength. Among the gods, Set stood apart in form as well. He bore the head of a creature unlike any on earth, a snout long and squared, ears sharp and tall, gaze unblinking. Some say it was a jackal, others an aardvark or desert hound. But truly, it was none of these. It was Set's head, a symbol of his wildness, his foreignness, his refusal to be categorized. He was called the Red One, the Storm Bringer, but also the Protector, because no force in the cosmos could withstand chaos as he could. Each night, as Ra sailed through the underworld on his golden boat, it was Set who stood at the bow, waiting, watching. And when Apep rose, great serpent of uncreation, jaws wide enough to swallow the sun, Set met him, not with prayer, but with a spear. His strength was unmatched among the gods, not gentle, not graceful, but brutal and clear. Set fought chaos not with reason, but with defiance. And in doing so, he became the paradox he always was, a god of chaos who fought against it, a god of destruction who preserved the world. This is where Set's true essence lies, not in the myths that cast him only as enemy, but in the balance he maintained by being different. Where others followed the path, he tested it. Where others comforted, he provoked. And it was needed. For how could order be proven if never tested? How could harmony be appreciated if not set against discord? Set came to be not as a rival to his family, but as their shadow. Every light has one. Every god must be reflected in something darker, more difficult. And so Set was born, not to destroy, but to define. And for a long time, he did just that. Let your thoughts settle around this truth, like sand settling after wind, that even in our world, not all guardians wear soft robes. Some wear dust and wind and silence, and they are holy too. In the golden age of gods, when Egypt was still shaped more by myth than memory, the world was ruled not by mortals, but by Osiris, Set's elder brother. Osiris was a king of calm rule, a bringer of agriculture and justice, beloved by the people. He taught them how to plow the land, how to make offerings, how to live by Ma'at. His reign was fertile as the Nile itself. Where he walked, things grew. Where he spoke, people listened. But even in the most carefully tended garden, wildness waits. And Set watched, not with mindless hatred, but with restless tension. He saw that Osiris was praised not only as king, but as perfect, always kind, always wise, always loved. Set, who had long stood at the edge, protector of the Red Land, guardian of Ra's boat, felt himself fading in the hearts of gods and mortals alike. His chaos, his strength, his sand and thunder, they were feared, but never honored. And so a rift opened, not merely between two brothers, but between two realities. One ruled by order, the other by challenge. And in time, as stories must, the tension reached its peak. The myth unfolds like a dream wrapped in symbol, never fully literal, yet deeply true. Set invited Osiris to a feast, grand and golden, filled with laughter and offerings. He presented a magnificent chest, carved of rare cedar, inlaid with precious stone. He declared that it would belong to whomever fit it perfectly. Osiris, ever trusting, stepped in, and when he did, Set's trap sprang shut, the lid sealed. The chest was locked. Some say Set cast it into the Nile. Others say he buried it deep in the earth. What matters is that Osiris was lost, not only to the world of the living, but to the very heartbeat of balance. For Set, this act was not simply murder. It was rebellion against the myth that only gentleness is divine, that chaos must always submit. He seized the throne, not as a usurper, but as a challenge to complacency. And the world changed. The Nile faltered. Crops withered. Not because Set lacked power, but because the world was not meant to be ruled by extremes. Set had removed not only his brother, but the reflection that held him in check. And without reflection, shadow grew too long. But even here, Set's story is not without beauty. For he did not destroy Isis. He did not erase Nephthys. He became the ruler of a harder world, a world that tested its people more than nurtured them, one where survival replaced comfort, where storms replaced song. And still, in these harsh conditions, the people lived. And in some places, they thrived. Isis, mourning but clever, began to gather the pieces of Osiris. Nephthys, Set's twin, joined her, sister to both the victim and the so-called villain. They did not curse Set. They simply moved forward with magic and purpose, weaving Osiris back together with threads of spell and memory. And from their union, a new force emerged. Horus, the falcon child of Isis, and the resurrected spirit of Osiris. Horus would grow not just as a son, but as a symbol of justice, of return, of rightful order. Set's reign would not last forever, and perhaps it was never meant to. But in those long years, when he ruled alone, he was not idle. He fought Apep still. He maintained the border still, He kept the world turning in his own way. This was Set's challenge, his transformation, from brother to rival, from guardian to king, not out of cruelty, but out of a truth too sharp for most to hold. He became the storm, and in doing so, he became necessary. Let this truth settle. Now, like twilight on warm stone, that even conflict can birth balance, that even shadow has shape, that every god walks not one path, but many. Time, in the ancient Egyptian view, was never lost. It circled back, like the looping breath of Ra's sunboat across the heavens. And so, the story of Set did not end with Osiris's death, nor even with his eventual defeat. Instead, it echoed, rippling outward into eternity, touching both sky and sand, temple and tomb. When Horus came of age, his challenge to Set was not swift. It was not a battle of blades, but of endurance, cunning, trials, and truth. Their conflict spanned 80 years, according to the old tales. Not years as we know them, but years woven in metaphor. Time that bends and folds in on itself like the winding Nile. The gods themselves presided over their debates, their contests, their hidden struggles. One trial had them racing across the sky as boats, another shape-shifting into beasts. In one strange tale, they argued through dreams, through visions, through riddles beneath the stars. At every turn, Set proved cunning, resilient, and bold. But Horus, born of pain and patience, endured. Eventually, it was not strength that crowned Horus king. It was balance. The gods saw that he could carry Ma'at without falling into pride. And so, the throne returned to Osiris's line. Set did not vanish. Though wounded in pride, he was not destroyed. He was given a place in the new order, still fierce, still vital. He continued to guard Ra's sunboat each night, forever facing Apep in the underworld's Black River. In this way, Set was both exiled and exalted, cast from kingship, but kept in duty, feared, but also respected. For even the gods knew, without Set, the serpent would win. His worship, too, did not fade. In some regions, particularly in the far deserts, Set was revered with equal reverence as any benevolent god. Warriors, travelers, and border dwellers called upon him for protection and endurance. His name was spoken with care. His shrines, built in places where the wind carved shapes into stone. Even pharaohs bore his name. One in particular, Seti, meaning he of Set, rose to power during a time of political restoration. His name was no accident. It was a claim to strength, to survival, to chaos, wielded with precision. In later periods, as foreign rulers came and cultures shifted, Set's image began to darken in the eyes of the people. Foreign gods were associated with disruption. The god of the borderlands became associated with invasion, with disorder. His once complex story was flattened into that of a villain, a betrayer, a monster. But the stones remember, and the wind through the desert still carries his name with reverence. To understand Set is to understand that darkness is not always evil, that destruction is not always cruelty, that what unsettles us often has something to teach. He is the whisper on the wind before a storm, the sound of sand shifting beneath one's feet, the silence between lightning and thunder. And in our own lives, when we face disruption, loss, or fire, we might remember him, not as a god to worship, perhaps, but as a symbol of what it means to endure, to stand firm at the edge of the world, to face what others flee, to hold back the serpent even when no one sees. This is Set's echo, not in the crowns of kings, but in the unseen acts of courage, not in the songs sung in temples, but in the quiet strength of those who keep going. So, dreamer, as you lie in the hush of your own darkness, know that even there, Set waits, not to frighten you, but to remind you that you are stronger than your chaos. In every culture, there are gods who dwell not in temples, but in twilight. Their names are spoken softly, not out of fear, but out of reverence for what they represent. Forces that are too wild to tame, too honest to be softened. Set is one of these. And around him, mystery coils like incense in a cold chamber. Despite his central role in some of Egypt's most pivotal myths, Set's true nature remains obscured, veiled by shifting narratives and cultural tides. His sacred animal, the so-called Set animal, remains one of the great unsolved riddles of Egyptology. Depicted with a long, curved snout, squared ears, and a forked tail, it matches no known creature. It is unique to him, and its identity has never been fully explained. What beast walks between real and imagined? What god claims a body that doesn't belong to this earth? Scholars have guessed aardvark, donkey, jackal, fennec fox, but none match. Because Set's creature, like Set himself, resists naming. To understand him is to accept that some truths cannot be categorized. His animal is only one of many secrets. There are sacred objects too, long since buried in desert wind or sealed beneath forgotten temples. Red stones used in his worship, now found in shards near ancient border sites. Knives engraved with glyphs of protection, meant to emulate the weapon Set used to defend Ra's sunboat from Apep, and ritual texts, rare and half-lost, that describe ceremonies honoring Set not as villain, but as hero, as guardian of thresholds, as guide through spiritual adversity. And perhaps most haunting are the missing pieces, temples of Set, deliberately erased, their walls chiseled clean, statues defaced, their faces scratched away, priesthood records vanished from archives where others are carefully kept. Why? Was Set's truth too dangerous for later ages to hold? Or did time itself try to forget what chaos once preserved? But mystery does not vanish. It settles beneath. And in the dry chambers of forgotten tombs, in the scripts left out of the most polished papyri, we catch echoes. Some claim Set was once far more powerful, that in older myths now lost, he was not a destroyer, but the one who came first, the one who cleared the way for creation by scattering the formless dark. Others believe he was protector of the sun before Ra, that the sky once belonged to him, and he passed it on. And still others suggest that Set was once the face of Heka itself, magic not of order, but of force, the raw, untamed energy that precedes understanding. None of these tales can be proven, but each one hums with possibility. To speak of Set is to whisper toward the unknowable, to honor what exists beyond the edge of comprehension. So let us linger now, not on what is certain, but what is sensed. The mysteries of Set are not meant to be solved, but to be held gently, like a red stone warmed by the sun, its shape strange and comforting all at once. To understand Set is not to find answers, but to welcome layers, like desert strata built by wind and time. One myth paints him in shadow, another cloaks him in gold. The more we search, the more he moves, like a figure glimpsed at the edge of the horizon, never quite still, never quite gone. In some ancient texts, Set was not a destroyer at all, but the first defender. In the pyramid texts, some of Egypt's oldest sacred writings, Set is described not as a villain, but as a necessary strength, called upon by pharaohs in the afterlife. There, he is the uplifter of the king, the one who helps the soul ascend. He is named beside Horus, not opposed to him, but alongside him, two halves of the whole. Horus, sight and inheritance. Set, force and forward motion. One interpretation says that Horus represents inner balance, and Set, the ability to face outer chaos. Together, they form a complete self. And yet, later stories begin to divide them more sharply. As dynasties shifted and rulers sought to rewrite myth in their image, Set became a symbol not of power, but of threat. Foreign invaders, Hittites, Hyksos, and others, were sometimes associated with Set, since his domain was the desert and the edges of Egypt's sacred boundaries. The god of the borderlands became, in the eyes of some, the god of outsiders. Some priests, favoring gods of fertility and renewal, began to rewrite Set's image, casting him as the murderer of Osiris, the disruptor of harmony, the selfish brother. But the myth was never that simple. There are versions, faint, nearly lost, that tell a different tale. That Set and Osiris did not hate each other. That their conflict was one of cosmic necessity, not personal cruelty. That Set, seeing Osiris's growing power, feared a future where too much stability would dull the edge of divine force. In those versions, his actions are not evil. They are ritual, part of a great spiritual drama: death, rebirth, tension, release. Set opens the world, and Osiris renews it. Other scholars have speculated that Set is not one being, but two truths in one skin. In his oldest form, he was honored, worshipped at Ombos and Sepermeru, with festivals that celebrated strength, endurance, and protection. But over time, as political powers changed, his image fractured. He became a mirror, reflecting whatever a culture feared most. Some say this is the true power of Set. He is not a static god, but a living archetype. He wears the face we give to challenge. He is the name we whisper when things fall apart, and the presence that watches as we build again. Others see him as the embodiment of Heka, the sacred force of transformation. Not the gentle magic of dreams, but the wild magic of thresholds, fire, storm, upheaval, choice. To call upon Set is not to ask for peace. It is to say, I am ready to change. But not all agree. Even in ancient times, temples would fall silent at the mention of his name. Some priests warned against his symbols. Some travelers left offerings at crossroads, not to honor him, but to keep him away. Such is the nature of a mystery. Set is both protector and punisher, both guardian and adversary. The truth depends not on him, but on who is asking. And that, perhaps, is the most enduring mystery of all. That Set cannot be understood in isolation. He must be seen within the dance of opposites. Only then does his shape begin to emerge, not a beast or man, god or villain, but as something older, something eternally necessary. The desert does not give up its secrets easily. Even now, as winds shift softly over ancient dunes, the shape of Set remains elusive, like a figure glimpsed through heat shimmer. He is there, and not. Present in silence, in thresholds, in every place where order falters and something unknown waits just beyond. The mystery of Set is not just historical. It is spiritual, symbolic, and deeply human. We live in a world that often craves clarity, good or bad, light or dark, hero or villain. But Set reminds us that the universe, the soul, the self, is far less simple. He does not rest in black or white, but in red, a sacred, charged color in Egyptian thought, the color of life and of chaos, of desert winds and sacred flame, of both crown and blood. To reflect on Set is to make peace with the ambiguous, the unresolved, with the parts of ourselves that do not fit cleanly into roles, with the decisions we make out of instinct, strength, or defiance, and with the knowledge that not all storms are meant to be avoided. Some come to clear the air. His temples may be mostly lost. His name may have been softened, erased, retold. But something in him endures, not through stone or scripture, but through the very act of questioning. What does it mean to protect the world by challenging it? What does it mean to be powerful and feared and still needed? Perhaps the reason we cannot solve Set's mystery is because he was never meant to be solved. He is not an answer, but a threshold, a gate in the desert, a breath before transformation. The Egyptians knew this. They built their gods not only to praise, but to contemplate. Their temples were not places of certainty, but places of alignment, of resonance. Set's image was not meant to soothe, but to test, to see what you carry within you when you face the unknown. And maybe that's what he still asks now, in the deep hours of the night. Can you sit in uncertainty without flinching? Can you hold the weight of chaos without letting it shatter you? Can you see yourself not as good or bad, but as both, and neither, and whole? If so, you are closer to Set than you think. So rest now, gentle listener, not with answers, but with space. Let the echoes of wind and sand pass through you like breath. Let mystery remain mystery. Let it live in you. And trust that some truths are meant not to be named, but simply to be felt. Long ago, in a time before kings wore crowns of gold, when the gods still walked the banks of the Nile in forms both animal and divine, there lived a ruler named Osiris. He was not only a god, but the first great king of Egypt, beloved by all who dwelled under the sky of Nut and upon the back of Geb, the earth. Osiris ruled with wisdom and patience. He brought agriculture to the people, taught them the cycles of planting and harvest, and introduced the sacred rituals that would anchor their lives in balance. Where he walked, barley rose. Where he spoke, hearts were soothed. His wife, Isis, the goddess of magic and healing, stood ever at his side, devoted, radiant, and sharp of mind. But there was one who watched this golden rain with a storm gathering in his heart. Set, Osiris's brother, lord of the desert, of wildness and storm. Set did not share in the love and praise lavished upon Osiris. He stood apart, crowned not by vines and blossoms, but by wind and flame. In time, the silence between them deepened. Set invited Osiris to a feast held in his honor, a celebration, or so it seemed. At the center of the banquet stood a magnificent chest carved of rare wood and lined with gleaming gold. Its form was exquisite, its craftsmanship divine. Set, smiling, declared, "Whosoever fits within this chest shall have it as a gift." Each guest tried, each failed, until Osiris, noble and unguarded, stepped forward, and when he lay inside, the lid closed. Quick as breath, Set and his followers sealed it shut, locked it with spells, and cast it into the Nile. Osiris was lost to the waters. The world mourned, the crops faltered, the sky dimmed. But Isis, ever faithful, did not yield. She searched far and wide, gathering the chest from the reeds, hiding it deep in a marsh. Yet Set, discovering her act, returned and scattered the pieces of Osiris across the land. Still, she did not break. With Nephthys, her sister, and the help of Anubis, guardian of the dead, Isis retrieved each sacred piece. Through spells, through sorrow, and through the force of Heka, she reassembled him, swathing his form in linen, breathing life through her tears and her incantations. And from this reunion, both sacred and sorrowful, was born a child, Horus, the falcon god. Horus grew not only in age, but in purpose. When the time came, he stood before the gods and challenged Set for the throne. Their conflict stretched across years and trials. They battled in the sky as animals. They debated in the court of the gods. They tested one another in riddles and strength. And though Set was powerful, fierce, unrelenting, it was Horus who was declared rightful heir, not for might alone, but for balance restored. Set was cast out, not destroyed, but displaced. He returned to the edges, to the deserts, to the border between seen and unseen. And Osiris? He became lord of the Duat, the underworld, not a place of punishment, but of sacred passage. There, he judged the dead, weighing hearts against the feather of Ma'at. And so the cycle was sealed. Life, death, rebirth, conflict, harmony, renewal. This is the story that endured, told in temples, carved into stone, whispered beside tombs. A tale of betrayal, loss, and restoration. A tale of light overcoming shadow. And yet, beneath the sand, other whispers remain. But for now, dear dreamer, let us lie quietly in this version and feel the slow turning of ancient time like a bark upon the black river. Listen now, not to the version carved in polished stone, but to the one whispered in wind-blown tents, in quiet desert sanctuaries, in forgotten corners of the Red Land. There was once another tale of Set and Osiris. It did not begin in hatred. It did not end in punishment. It was not a battle between good and evil. It was something more subtle, more human, more divine. In this telling, Set does not envy Osiris. He loves him, not with gentleness, perhaps, nor ease, but with the fierce loyalty of shadow to flame. Set, born of the storm, watched as Osiris brought abundance and reverence to the land. And though the people adored Osiris, they did not understand Set's gifts. They saw in him only dust and harshness, never the protection, never the power, never the flame that pushes growth from seed through hardship. Set remained at the edge, unthanked, but ever watchful. He was Ra's shield in the underworld, the one who faced the unfaceable, the serpent that would devour all. But still, no songs were sung for him. And then came the moment of parting, not out of hatred, but out of sacred necessity. Osiris had grown too rooted, too fixed. The world had begun to sink into comfort. Cycles require not only growth, but death. And Set, the keeper of thresholds, knew what must be done. The chest was not a trap, but a ritual vessel, a coffin made not for murder, but for transcendence. Osiris, in this telling, agreed to the sacrifice. He entered the box willingly, knowing that to truly rule the eternal, he must descend first. Set sealed the box not as betrayal, but as transformation. He did not scatter the body out of rage. He scattered it so that Isis would call upon her deepest magic, so that the divine feminine, the sacred art of reassembly, would be awakened in full. Set did not seek the throne for power. He held it while the world trembled, guarding it, not grasping it. He ruled not in celebration, but in silence. And when Horus rose to challenge him, Set did not destroy the child. He tested him. He ensured the air was strong enough, balanced enough, wise enough to carry what Osiris had left behind. And when the time came, Set stepped down, not defeated, but fulfilled. In this telling, Set is not the murderer, but the midwife of renewal, not the villain, but the necessary opposite, the one who brings endings so that beginnings may have meaning. Why then was this version buried? Perhaps because it asked too much of us, to see the destroyer as sacred, to see the one who disturbs the peace as keeper of the deeper harmony, to admit that sometimes those we fear are the ones who hold the gate open for us. This story was not written on temple walls. It was passed through voices, breath to breath. And though the sand tried to bury it, some truths never sleep. So lie still now, dear listener. Let this version echo in your quiet thoughts, not to replace the first, but to live beside it. For all stories carry more than one truth, and all gods wear more than one face. Stories are like rivers. They change course, they overflow, they recede, but they never truly stop flowing. The myth of Set, too, has followed such a riverbed, shifting with the dynasties, darkening with conquest, brightening in whispers, vanishing in one era, and returning in another with a different face. In one telling, Set is the storm that shatters the garden. In another, he is the one who keeps the garden from growing stagnant. The truth is not fixed. It glides just beneath the surface, like the Nile under moonlight, too deep to grasp, yet always there. Ancient Egypt itself embraced this fluidity. The priests, the scribes, the storytellers, they understood that a myth could have layers, that a god could be many things, not contradiction, but complexity, not confusion, but a sacred tension. Set was not feared because he was cruel. He was feared because he was necessary. He was the part of existence that refused to stay still, the voice in the dark that asks, "Are you ready to change?" Perhaps the greatest truth that remains is not in what Set did or did not do, but in what he represents, a part of every soul that pushes boundaries, faces storms, and walks willingly into wildness in search of meaning. He teaches that chaos is not always your enemy. That discomfort can be a divine teacher. That exile is sometimes the price of clarity. And still he watches, from the red dunes, from the edge of the horizon, from the darkened prow of Ra's boat each night as it crosses the underworld, not seeking worship, not demanding love, only existing as reminder, as gatekeeper, as flame in the desert wind. Let your thoughts rest in this now, that myths do not ask for belief, but for presence. They are mirrors we gaze into, not to see gods, but to see ourselves more clearly. Set, in all his paradoxes, invites us not to choose a version, but to hold them both, the light and the shadow, the river and the sand, the truth we're told, and the truth we feel. And in doing so, we become part of the myth, not just listeners, but dreamers of the next telling. So when the storm stirs in your own life, and when old forms fall away, think of Set, not as destroyer, but as threshold, and know you are not alone. So now, dear dreamer, you return, not fully, but slowly. The story lingers like heat in desert stone, warm beneath the surface, quiet in its depth. You have walked beside Set, across sand and sky, through myths of conflict and sacrifice, through mysteries that refused to be solved. You have listened not only to the tale that is told, but to the one that sleeps behind it. Let yourself drift now between breath and memory. You do not need to hold the full shape of the story, only the feeling it leaves behind, something ancient and strong and still unfolding. Set has many faces. He is the storm and the shield, the scream and the silence, the one who dares to change the world when others would let it crumble slowly in peace. He is not meant to comfort. He is meant to endure. And in this, he becomes something sacred, a god not of answers, but a presence. In the darkness of your own life, in the moments when forms fall apart, or when you stand at some internal border between who you were and who you might become. Think of Set, not to follow, but to stand beside, to feel the weight of change and not turn away. He teaches that exile is not always punishment, that storms are not always destruction, that the edge of the world may be where the gods wait, not to banish you, but to invite you forward. You are not meant to sleep with certainty. You are meant to sleep wrapped in possibility. So let the red sands settle now in your dreams. Let the sky turn slowly overhead, its stars gentle, watchful, ancient. Let Set fade, not vanish, but return to his watchful place at the edge of myth, where he waits not to be loved, but to be understood. in the soft, wordless way of those who endure, who protect what others cannot, and who remind us that not all gods wear gold. Breathe slowly, Ah. In through the hush, out through the stillness. Let the story fold itself gently into sleep. The storm has passed. The balance has returned. You may rest.